Awesome. I mean, now I feel even higher up. Is Bitcoin institutional adoption a good thing? Where's the current state of Bitcoin adoption institutional-wise? I want to go just a quick round, just to warm up, like what even is institutional adoption, what's the current state, and I would just like to start with Samson. Go ahead.
Well, I would say institutional adoption is very high right now. If you look at it as people investing into the corporate treasuries, I think strategy is paving the way, opening the door to a lot of institutional capital, fixed income markets, etc. So I think it's quite big right now, but we're not seeing the impact yet on the price.
Okay. Please, Jonas.
Yeah, so I work for what's the equivalent of a pension fund in Australia, and we're actually the first one to invest in Bitcoin. So in Australia, institutional adoption, at least in the pension space, is still brand new, and I think globally it's the same. There's like a handful of pension funds worldwide. But as Samson said, like right now it's starting to pick up. I think the launch of the ETFs was really what triggered that, and we're in the very early stages. It's just going to get bigger.
So yeah, in my professional life, I don't really see much institutional adoption in general, but obviously, we all see what's going on out there in the world. Large companies are starting to acquire a lot more Bitcoin. There's kind of a snowball effect from some of the really big companies like MicroStrategy, or Strategy as it's now called, inspiring other companies to try and do the same sort of thing. There's attempts at government adoption. So I think we're at a tipping point where a lot could happen. Whether that's a good thing or not is something I think we're going to discuss a bit more as we go on.
Yeah, I'm working for one of the 7 biggest banks in Switzerland. For me, institutional adoption is providing Bitcoin services to the public, to the mainstream, like settlement services, peer-to-peer services, trading services, and so on. Yeah.
It's super interesting, and Ben just brought it up, like, is this thing a good thing? And I remember Satoshi also was, in the early days, very cautious to not let Bitcoin spread too fast, to not have some alarm bells ringing and have it killed too early. How do you think about that, Ben, when you think about, is this a good thing, a bad thing? Is there such a thing as bad adoption?
So I think potentially there is, but I have to put a caveat first. Bitcoin is an open standard, and it always should be an open standard. So when we talk about whether or not it's a good thing, we're actually talking about whether or not we, on a social layer kind of aspect, should consider it a good thing or not. I don't think it would ever be right to try and implement something technically to say, hey, we don't like this, so we're going to stop it. I don't think that's realistically possible nor desirable. But I do think there is such a thing as bad adoption. I think one of the big concerns that exists is the creation of paper Bitcoin, in the same way that there's been a lot of paper gold and other things. So the more institutional adoption there is, the more opportunity there is for Bitcoin to be faked, have all of these exchanges holding Bitcoin or large companies holding Bitcoin, and there being no real proof of reserves, no real way of actually showing what they have, and rehypothecating Bitcoin and doing other crazy things like that dilute what Bitcoin actually is.
Is there a risk for that, for rehypothecation and for basically bad adoption of Bitcoin, in your opinion, Samson?
Well, I think the wave of adoption we're seeing right now is far less risky than things of past years. So it's far less likely that a publicly traded company audited by big 4 financial firms is going to rehypothecate or be fractional in their holdings. It's more likely something like FTX would have done it years ago, and which they did do it. But there is, I guess, sell pressure from the creation of paper Bitcoin, whether it's some form of derivative or just outright fraud. But I would worry less about companies that are in the treasury space doing that, because it's like probably 0.01% chance that they're actually fractional. But I'm not really sure proof of reserves helps in this case, because you might know that they have the coins and they're on chain and you can identify the addresses. But what about the liabilities? Do they have any extraneous agreements? Are they? Is there some lien on their assets there's lots of things you don't know about the overall structure, which POR doesn't necessarily clarify.
Do you look, and we have with Australia, with the fund, you have done sort of the first kind of steps towards that, and you kind of adopted a small Bitcoin stack. How do you look at proof of reserve and being like institutional adoption, if it's a good thing and bad thing, and all the developments that are currently happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is something that I've brought up at my fund as well, is that at the moment we have a very small allocation, so I'm not too worried about that. But once we actually scale this up and once other funds follow, one thing that I definitely want to do is push for proof of reserves, and also proof of reserves in the best cryptographic way where they can actually prove that they are holding the Bitcoin for us and they don't just have one address that holds Bitcoin and they tell everyone, oh, your Bitcoin is here, you know what I mean? Otherwise, that gets a bit convoluted again as well. But also coming back to the point of whether institutional adoption is good or bad, I think my opinion and the way that I look at that is that if Bitcoin really is what we think it is, and it's now at a point where it's so decentralized and beyond the reach of control of anybody, is there even such a thing as something that's bad for Bitcoin? Like, isn't institutional adoption inevitable for getting to full adoption anyway? And I think the expectation that institutions would stay out of it was unrealistic from the get-go. This just had to happen at some point, and right now we're at that point.
Do you look at, yeah, please.
I think I forgot to answer that part of the question. But I don't think it is bad, just for the same reasons you said. If Bitcoin is valuable, everyone will want it. And we also get the same feedback as we're working on nation-state adoption. People criticize us at Jan 3 and say, well, why are you helping governments get Bitcoin? Well, they're going to get it eventually. The question is, how do they get it? Are they going to focus on taxing your Bitcoin or seizing your Bitcoin? Or are they mining Bitcoin with excess energy? There's a lot of different permutations of which you can get Bitcoin adoption at a country level, but the bigger thing is we can steer things in the right direction. So if you believe companies or corporations should have proof of reserves, we can direct that, push it in that direction. But for nation states, what we want to do is push them to have the good regulations, enshrine the rights of their citizens and people holding Bitcoin, things like that. We can direct the way that things go.
Yeah, to add that, I see it like Samson. I think it's a good thing if it's done right. It gives technology maturity. It gives regulation clarity. And just per example, in Switzerland, already half of the population have access to Bitcoin services. That's 4 million people. And the precondition for that was actually a regulation framework. So we had the framework to how we should do it in a safe and secure way, in a guarded way of that. And that's, I think, a good way. Well, and then Bitcoin is a resilient protocol. It has its core principles. And I think, we will stick to that. And that helps to preserve Bitcoin.
How do you look at that, Ben? Because I'm kind of torn apart. Where yes, I want my nation state to adopt Bitcoin first. But in general, I like individuals having as many Bitcoin as possible in the nations. Not too many. How do you look at the nation state adoption side of things and how the game theory of that works out?
So I think nation state adoption is always an interesting question because cards on the table for everyone here. I am an anarchist. I don't believe nation states should exist. And so thank you. Should nation states hold Bitcoin? No, because nation states shouldn't exist. But okay, they do exist. So we shouldn't just speak in this hypothetical world. I think it is much better for the individuals within the nation to have access to Bitcoin, to be able to control their own wealth, control their own financial freedom, than it is for the nation state to hold a lot of Bitcoin. Because overall, if the state holds a lot of Bitcoin, even if they do good things, you're still under the control of somebody else who could change their mind. They could change their mind and no longer do things that you agree with and start doing things you disagree with. Whether you're left, whether you're right, whether, regardless of your political affiliation, somebody else is going to probably come into power and start doing things that you disagree with. And they've got this huge reserve of Bitcoin to be able to do the things that you disagree with. So if I have to say individuals versus the governments, of course I will always side with the individuals. But like I said at the start, though, I don't think it's possible to stop them from doing so. The best way that we can actually fight against governments holding too much Bitcoin is to start holding more Bitcoin ourselves. So that is the thing we should be doing. We should all be trying to, hold Bitcoin, use Bitcoin, have Bitcoin for ourselves. That reduces their ability to have as much of it because it's a fixed asset.
It's a permissionless system because the worst thing about Bitcoin is even the worst enemy of you can adopt it. But it's a good point of the nation-state adoption. I had a few people come up like, all of a sudden, like nation-states are looking into Bitcoin. Now I feel it's safe to adopt Bitcoin. So nation-state adoption can also actually drive individual adoption. How do you look at that, Samson? How was your kind of experience also with nation-state adoption, actually maybe even driving individual adoption?
Well, I think a lot of people look towards the government for direction. Obviously not you guys, but a lot of people are worried. So, for example, if a country says you can't use Bitcoin for payments, a lot of people will not use Bitcoin for payments. So, for example, like Indonesia, you can't pay with Bitcoin, and most people don't want to rock the boat, similar to many other situations, right? Like the 6102 executive order. It's not exactly a confiscation, but it's a strong incentive that you should, give your gold up. And most people would do that because they don't want to run the risk of running afoul. So I think if the government does endorse it in some way, it does change the equation somewhat. And as Benjamin was saying, if you think a nation state shouldn't exist, that's good. But they exist right now. We exist right now. And the only thing I can think of to do that fixes things a little bit is to inject a bit of orange pill into the nation state. And usually when people learn about Bitcoin, and governments are made up of people, it does change them. So they'll learn a little bit, and maybe they'll get into the Bitcoin ethos, into the cypherpunk ethos, and learn about hard money. Like, I can't see them not learning anything. Like, nobody in government X learns anything about Bitcoin if they have a Bitcoin strategy. There's got to be some trickle-down effect to the government and then to the people.
But, sorry if I could, just quick. I would like to ask, though, what do you think about the idea that, governments are made of people, but the people in the government change? Right now, that they adopt Bitcoin, they're doing all the right things, they have the right understanding of it, and now a new government comes into power, and they've got this massive Bitcoin, and they don't understand it. They just want to use it as a tool to bludgeon the people, and take control. Doesn't that concern you?
So you're saying, like, for example, in the US, if Trump actually creates a strategic reserve and they have 1 million coins and the Democrats come to power, they're going to do something bad with it or sell it?
I wouldn't use that exact example because, I would actually view it the other way around. But regardless, that would be that type of example. Somebody else comes into power who doesn't understand what they've got and they use it in very negative ways.
But what would that look like? Like, how would they use it in a way that's bad for the population, in a way that they can't technically use the fiat that they can print out of thin air right now?
I was going to say the same thing. Like, Bitcoin aside, there are many things the government can use, like the army, to do many things to us. So Bitcoin is one of many tools they have at their disposal.
One of the good things about Bitcoin is Bitcoin changes people more than institutions change Bitcoin. So that was what I experienced. And with that, we have the possibility and chance to educate, like you say, to teach, to implement. And that's actually a good thing.
And I think if you really think this through in the very, very long run, and we get to hyper-Bitcoinization and all governments, if they still exist, hold Bitcoin and use Bitcoin, then they have to actually use the Bitcoin and spend it if they want to do something like go to war or do something bad. So in a way, over the long enough time horizon, Bitcoin will naturally distribute across the population again if it's used as money because they can't print any more of it. And I know I'm going very far into the future, but isn't that what the very long term would look like?
I would completely agree. In the hyper-Bitcoinized environment where Bitcoin is the standard money for the world, it becomes less of a problem because governments can no longer, well, they can't print money. It's something which is outside of their control. So we've taken the control of the money away from the governments, and they can't use it in as nefarious ways. They can still, of course, use it, but as they use their money, they then have less money, which is great. That's not the case with the fiat standard.
I want to bring it to the other side, because nation states can adopt Bitcoin not only in just buying it, but they can also, for example, I don't know, make tax-free transactions up until $10,000 or 1,000 euros or whatever, which I think in the Cynthia Lummis bills or in America is in there, the proposal. How do you see nation states actually adopting Bitcoin to drive more Bitcoin adoption and not just buying it?
So I think El Salvador is actually a really interesting example, because El Salvador, tried to say, we're adopting Bitcoin, it's legal tender, everyone can use it. There's been a couple of weird things recently, back and forth and so on. But overall, there was this strong attempt to say Bitcoin is the money of El Salvador. But in reality, dollars are still the currency of El Salvador, and Bitcoin adoption tends to be largely in the bottom-up grassroots kinds of places. So El Zonte, Bitcoin Beach, more recently Berlin, up in the mountains. So you've got these pockets of real Bitcoin adoption, and nothing they are doing required what the government did. So maybe it helped a little bit on the impetus. Maybe it made them say, oh, okay, this is something we can try now. We feel more comfortable trying it. But they didn't actually require the government in order to do that. So they built these Bitcoin communities without the government's help. And I think that can happen anywhere that the government isn't actively trying to stop you from doing so. So if the government just stays out of it, we can do that.
It's an interesting, this bottom-up versus top-down approach. How do you look at that, Serge?
Well, the great thing about Bitcoin is it grew bottom-up, and I think it's one of the best things with money, with Bitcoin. But I think also it's good when we have a gate. Like, I see El Salvador as a gate for people to, even when we talk about it, right? The states talk about it, they discuss it. What could it be? How it could work as legal tender in different states, and what's actually the benefits of that? And I think that's not a bad thing. Yeah, we have to do it in a responsible way. Yeah, it can happen in a different way. But at some point, it's not that bad to have it also top down on a different view, maybe in a wider scale, to get it faster growing, right?
It's the top-down approach that kind of pulls the bottom-up forward, I guess. How was your experience with top-down and talking with the nations and getting that adoption forward and not waiting till it's obvious for the kind of the nation states?
So top-down adoption is really difficult, actually. So initially, post El Salvador, we tried a lot of top-down adoption, reaching out to heads of state and seeing what we could do. But what we realized was, El Salvador is very unique. The president there has control over Congress, so he can pass any law he wants. In other countries, there's a lot of opposition. The political structure is more decentralized. So, for example, in Costa Rica, there's 6 very strong parties, and we tried, but it's very difficult. I don't think you can replicate that model anywhere else very easily. So we've shifted our strategy a bit. We're trying to initiate some smaller local projects with the governments directly, like creating a sandbox project somewhere, or possibly a special economic zone, or things that we can do together, or maybe autonomous regions within the country. But I think it's probably going to end up being more of these grassroots bottom-up initiatives or small initiatives we undertake with governments in partnership with them.
Isn't that then anyways bottom-up if you have local projects, even though it is with the government, but that's kind of bottom-up, right?
In some ways, I would say.
How do you look at bottom-up versus top-down?
I mean, I think top-down helps in the sense that once governments signal that they're open to Bitcoin and that they're adopting it themselves. Like for us as an institutional investor, seeing the US strategic reserve was a massive signal that we had actually done the right thing when we invested in Bitcoin last year, and we're now talking about increasing our investment in Bitcoin, not as a result of the strategic reserve, but it definitely made a stronger case for it. So I think top-down adoption or governments adopting in general just sends a signal to everybody, like you said, to start adopting Bitcoin, and it's now safe. Hey, governments are holding this, which gives the population confidence that they're not going to be penalized for adopting Bitcoin, that it's safe for them to adopt Bitcoin. So positive regulation must come with that government adoption. Otherwise, the government's just doing it for themselves, but leaving the population out of it. But I think all in all, the top-down adoption is going to lead to more bottom-up adoption as well, because one thing we're doing, for example, now is we're actively working with regulators, and we're almost in the industry of pension funds are now doing a bottom-up adoption of Bitcoin, because we're talking to other pension funds about this, we're talking to regulators about this, and we're leading by example, and we've got great returns on the investment that we made. So yeah, I think that's what it's going to be like.
I want to start one new round, because all of that is, okay, nation-state adoption. What can people actually take away from that? And one thing where I have an on and off relationship with is, should I be more active politically or not? Should I try to like influence the political landscape to have more Bitcoin view, or just like, hey, I have Bitcoin, I stay out of politics? And this time I want to start with Serge here and go the round of like, should Bitcoiners be more politically active, influence the political landscape, or we have Bitcoin and just like stay out of it?
Yeah, it could also help, but it's also a risk in it, right? So when we talk about how it's handled and how it's implemented in certain bills, so I think it helps to discuss the topic, to give certain structures, even market entrance with that, and yeah, I think it could help when you do it in the right way. So,
how you look at Ben?
So I think there's two types of being politically active. There is being politically active within the system, and there's being politically active outside of the system. And I think both approaches are valuable. Both approaches have some use. But when it comes to influencing politicians, I actually do see a lot of value in doing that, but not to make new regulations to make things clearer, but rather get rid of existing regulations that are in the way. Some very good examples of that, I was born in the wonderful country of New Zealand. I haven't lived there in many, many years, but New Zealand doesn't have capital gains tax. There is no such thing on any assets. Capital gains tax just doesn't exist. So Bitcoin adoption is much easier for people because capital gains tax is one of those few things that really harms people's ability to freely interact with Bitcoin. I want to receive some, I want to send some, I don't want to have to think about it because it's just money. But capital gains tax is one of those things that jumps in there and messes everybody up. So getting rid of capital gains tax entirely, or even just getting rid of it on certain asset classes such as Bitcoin, is the kind of thing that I would actively campaign for and push governments to do. Despite my dislike of governments, I'm willing to be a pragmatist on this and help them come up with better ways of doing things.
I have one follow-up for that, because I'm really interested in that. When you say like, okay, we want to get rid of nation states, when you then say like, okay, we want to influence nation states, isn't that giving them more power when you're like giving them the energy?
No, it's more or less saying they already have the power, and it's a recognition of the fact that they exist. Like Samson said, I can talk all day about nation states shouldn't exist, but realistically they do, and we have to work within a framework that they do. So, I can scream against the wall as much as I like that they shouldn't exist, but I want to make the world a better place, and to do that we need to get Bitcoin adoption out there. And if I can help a government or tell a government they need to get rid of capital gains tax as one of the main things for improving Bitcoin adoption, I will happily talk to them about that.
Absolutely. Jonas?
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the beginning, I don't think anything's bad for Bitcoin, so talking to politicians about it and getting them on board can only be good as well. I think a lot of politicians, unfortunately, are going to initially do it for the wrong reasons. They just want to get votes. they want to get in power. But once again, nothing's bad for Bitcoin. So if that's the initial reason, just like the initial reason for most people personally adopting Bitcoin is number go up, but then they stay for freedom go up. And if it allows more people in the population to adopt Bitcoin, or maybe for the politicians to actually look at what they just tried to get votes for, over the long run, it'll be good for Bitcoin.
Yeah, so I think even though we've shifted our strategy a bit to try to initiate projects, we're still optimistic that maybe something will happen. So we still engage. And I would say you should engage, because at the end of the day, it's really about education. If you're engaging with a politician or a regulator, you are teaching them something. And the thing we forget is that we live in kind of a Bitcoin bubble. And a lot of politicians are always thinking about other things. There's always some scandal, some disaster, something going on. Like, if you think of the US right now and Trump, like, how much do you think he's thinking about Bitcoin right now? Probably zero, because there's something else going on. And that's really the life of politicians and people in power, because they always have something to deal with, and we have to bring it up to the table. And I think just bringing the topic up is valuable, because otherwise it won't get any airtime, it won't get consideration. But just making the narrative that countries are adopting does have some beneficial knock-on effect. Like if we meet a head of state, you get a news cycle out of that. And then if you live in, New Zealand, you can bring that to somebody there and say, hey, look at this country is talking about Bitcoin. But everything does contribute. And you mentioned capital gains tax as a blocker, and it's good that there's no cap gains in New Zealand. So you can almost use Bitcoin as de facto money, because there is no cap gains. But even like in the US, where you have a Steak and Shake taking payments, technically everyone buying a burger and fries in the US should be paying cap gains on that burger and fries. But this little act of defiance, or whatever you want to call it, does contribute, because it initiates another discussion of, is Bitcoin money? Is Bitcoin something you can pay for your lunch with? Should you be paying cap gains on buying your lunch? But I think everything is good for Bitcoin, and there's nothing that we can do that's bad for Bitcoin, except for spamming the network.
I would agree there's nothing I agree there's nothing bad for Bitcoin. Bitcoin will survive, essentially, no matter what the rest of us do. But there are things which are bad for people around Bitcoin. And I'm always very careful to make that distinction. I am a Bitcoiner. I care very much about Bitcoin succeeding, but I also don't think I need to do that much to help it succeed. Bitcoin succeeds on its own. But what the world looks like around that makes a huge difference. Authoritarians with a huge amount of power amassing Bitcoin is a dangerous thing compared to much more open societies, much more free societies amassing significant amounts of Bitcoin. So I think societally we need to think about how we approach that. It's not a technical matter, it's not anything to do with Bitcoin directly, it's more the side effects around Bitcoin.
We also have this in the headline. It's the Bitcoin shift. So we're kind of looking at the different buckets. We have the individuals, we have states, we have nation states, and all of them are kind of very early in their Bitcoin journey. We often forget, as Samson said, we're in this Bitcoin bubble. Like, it's a huge conference, 10,000 people. But then when you go out on a normal street outside of Bitcoin conferences, you talk to 100 people and ask them what's the difficulty adjustment, you might get 2 good answers if you're lucky. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming in that Bitcoin shift, and then a little bit of how this looks like. Maybe I start with you, Jonas.
What exactly do you want to know by Bitcoin shift?
How does the Bitcoin shift look like, and how fast we are going there, and like what's the kind of the adoption looking like to this Bitcoin world?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good question. I mean, one thing that I often look at, I run a few educational sessions at my fund, and one thing that I always show is where we are on the S-shaped adoption curve, most likely, or based on the best estimates. And it's usually somewhere around 5% adoption. But when you look at the curve, we're still at basically the bottom. Like, you can barely distinguish between 0 and where we currently are. So I feel like we're now getting towards the part where that slope is starting to take off, and nation state and institutions will help there. In terms of education, I think this, like Samson said, education is the most important part. It's one thing I actively do in my fund and in Australia in general, but without getting the education out there, I don't think we will get much further. So anybody who's an educator, anybody who can help educate, I think this is the foundation that this shift will be built upon. And I know you're doing a great job with your podcast, Robin, and other people as well. So keep educating.
I want to go to Samson. I think a question that you might get often, like when is this Omega candle coming? Like how fast is this Bitcoin adoption shift coming to this Bitcoin world? How do you look at that?
Well, I see all of the pieces of the puzzle are already here. You have the ETFs, which unlock the door to capital. And previous cycles, you would see like exchanges are the bottleneck because they can't onboard people fast enough because of KYC or whatever, and that barrier is gone. And also, ETFs open the door to central banks buying. I think it's not just the ETFs, but also like derivative products like strategy. They can buy those easily, and they have Bitcoin exposure. So every single barrier is gone on that side in terms of the window. And then you have companies like Strategy and others tackling fixed income and other unique markets, bond markets, convertible bonds, and that's driving more. And I think yesterday, one of the major banks in Russia launched a Bitcoin bond. So I think we're going to see more Bitcoin bonds or Bit bonds or things like that coming to market. So I honestly don't know when the Omega candle is coming, but everything is here. We just have to sit back and wait.
We talked about that on first actually on the main stage, that bonds might be the first kind of big bucket that we actually tackle in terms of like where's the monetary premium for Bitcoin coming, bonds, real estate, gold, all those different asset classes. You also see bond as kind of the first big equity, big money pocket that Bitcoin sucks in.
Yeah, definitely as a really accessible market. But secondly, you have demonetization of gold. I think once we cross $500,000 per Bitcoin, you'll start to see gold demonetizing in favor of Bitcoin, and then possibly real estate too. So these are two big buckets that will eventually drain into Bitcoin. So Hal Finney's original prediction of 10 million a coin is not that far away.
Awesome. Ben, how do you look at that?
So I actually think the demonetization of things like gold and real estate is an incredibly positive thing for the world that is going to happen. And I agree completely with Samson there, especially because right now, that is one of the things which is causing a lot of problems in the world. People have difficulty finding appropriate housing because housing is ridiculously expensive. Housing is ridiculously expensive because it's used as money instead of being used as housing. So I think there's a lot of social good that can be done from having a purer form of money, which is only money, which is what Bitcoin is. So I see that as a very good thing. As for the Bitcoin shift overall, I think one of the challenges that we have is defining what the Bitcoin shift actually is. How much understanding is required to actually say that somebody has, in some way, as a human being, adopted Bitcoin. I don't expect everybody out there to all of a sudden know how to, create their own wallet, manage their own seed phrase, all that sort of thing. It's just not. It's not what people are comfortable doing, and if people aren't comfortable doing it, they're not going to do it. So there's going to be abstraction layers. There already are a lot of abstraction layers, but there's going to be more abstraction layers. There's going to be more different systems, different ways that people interact with Bitcoin. And exactly what those look like, I think, is going to shape very much what the future world looks like. If we have a world where, for example, everything is done on centralized exchanges, they hold all of the Bitcoin and all you're doing is shuffling a few bits around between them, I think Bitcoin is no longer being used the way Bitcoin should be used, and there's going to be a lot of things breaking and a lot of opportunity for people to do very, very bad things. If somebody else has control over your money, you're in trouble a lot of the time. So we need to figure out, the technologists, which I'll include myself there, we need to figure out what are the ways that we can create these abstraction layers, these easy ways for that ramp up on the S-curve to happen while still maintaining things like sovereignty over your own money. And I think that's a critical thing.
Ben brought up the question, like, what is the Bitcoin shift and how does it look like and how fast are we developing? How do you look at that, Serge?
Well, what I experience is the paradigm shift of this asset is really complicated to understand to a lot of people. So as we study it for years, and you guys study it for years, myself study it for years, we are really into this topic. But when I talk to clients, customers, they're so far away. They just say, why is no one behind it? Why it has no intrinsic value? And such questions. And I think in these terms, the paradigm shift or the Bitcoin shift will take longer than we expected. But I think the institutional adoption, like Bitcoin treasury companies, the smart money coming in, will faster growing than we expect with that. And also institutional providing services will go faster than we expected, I think. With the US, the biggest capital market is coming with crypto-friendly, Bitcoin-friendly regulation. And I think the big banks there will also do their thing to adopt Bitcoin and to give it to their clients. But in terms to think what Bitcoin is, I think we still have a lot of work to do to educate people. And I hope you all do and we do as well.
I have one other thing that just came to mind, and this isn't necessarily a Bitcoin shift, but like a shift that I saw in the last couple of years in society in general, and I'm sure everybody here has seen that as well. Or it's because I'm 31 now and I'm getting to the age where people talk about money, but I think it's my original idea. And that's that in my social circle and like wherever I go, people are starting to really question why things are getting more expensive. What's causing all this? Where's all this coming from? They're trying to really understand money. They're thinking still about real estate and things like that as stores of value, but they're realizing that something seems to be broken. And I think after COVID, when we printed a lot of money all over the world, people really started to wake up. So I feel like people are building that awareness. They're looking for a tool. They don't know what the best tool yet is, but they're almost there.
I'm going to do a last round as the time is slowly running out for us. What's the most important message for each and every one of us to take away from today's talk? And I want to start it off with Serge again. What is kind of like your most important message to the Bitcoin conference out there?
Well, yeah, study Bitcoin. Don't trust verify a lot. It has so complex topics in there and a lot of stuff to learn about economics, about technology, about social things. So study that, but also try to be critical in the point, well, to consider, to think about if it's good or can we do something better in the space or with the protocol or adoption. Yeah, that will be my message.
Yeah, that's a great point. Ben, please.
My message would be that Bitcoin is money. And I mean that in its most direct sense. Money is something you earn, it's something you spend, it's something you save. And you shouldn't try to treat it like something else. The technology behind it, yeah, it's complex, and some people have to understand it and learn it. And I'm one of those people. I know Bitcoin relatively well inside out, but not everybody has to. What you have to know is that it is money, and you can hold it in the same way that you hold money, and you can spend it in the same way that you spend money. You can earn it in the same way that you earn any other kind of money. And the more people who do that have the more control you will each individually have over your own financial future, your own destiny, your children, your children's children. You will all benefit from treating Bitcoin as money, not as something else, some kind of weird asset class or something different, something special. It's money. And chances are you don't know how your existing money works either. If you hold euro or dollars or whatever, you don't know how the back end of that works. It's ridiculously complex and insane and messy. And I work for a payments company, and just looking at how credit card transactions are processed, it's completely insane. Bitcoin is actually easier. than most of those systems. So if you don't know how the existing money works, why should you need to go into this deep detail as an everyman? I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying you don't necessarily need to in order to actually use it as money.
Great message. Please.
I mean, most of you are already doing the right thing by being here, but as I've said previously, education is such a key piece. So spread the word, try to help people around you. You can't change the world, but if we all focus on our inner circle and our families and friends and spread the word there, then maybe we can affect a little bit of change. And in the process, I would highly recommend to stay humble, be understanding, and of course to continue to stack sats.
Sorry, Robin, what was the question again?
I was asking for like kind of the last famous words, the kind of the most important message that the people can take away from today's talk, from today's conference. If there's like one thing that people should take away from this conference, what should that be?
I mean, we are here at this conference probably to learn about Bitcoin. So learn about Bitcoin, and if you want to contribute to the network, run a node. If it's not Bitcoin in your own wallet, it's not your Bitcoin. And yeah, just pay attention and don't trust and verify. I think there's a lot of marketing out there these days, and it's been the same tale as old as time, even from early 2010, 11. Everyone is trying to get your Bitcoin, so just be careful.
Thank you so much. Give it up.
Secure your BTC Prague 2026 ticket at the lowest possible price now.